So we are at the two dots on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, about 2/3 of the way down, 11 lines from the bottom. Taner Rabban, Shloisha Sheyardu Loshum. Three Dayanim, and they had to go down to the estate of a Yasim. Yasim had Yarshin some possessions, some assets, and they need to sell some of the assets in order to pay the obligations of the estate. That means there's a wife or there's a daughter who is entitled to mezainis, like we learned back in Ksubis, under which circumstances you sell some of the possessions. But in order to protect the assignment, Bezdin has to sign off on the value of the assets that are being sold, that they're being sold at an appropriate value. As we're going to see in the Gemara, it's sort of there's sort of a tendency to want to accept, as we're going to see, generally the lowest viable price. If you remember back from the prices, right? You have to go down to the lowest price without going under. And that seems to be the Gemara's approach as well. You have to figure out what's the lowest price that, well, I mean, I guess they're trying to protect the Yas, they want to get the highest price, but they have to also pick a price. If they dictate a price, they say $1,000 for a vase, and the vase is only worth $500, it's going to gum up the works because they're not going to be able to sell it. And then the wife and the sisters are not going to be able, the daughters are not going to be able to get their needed mezainis. So they have to figure out what's the I guess the highest amount that it'll for sure sell, and the lowest amount that's fair. So you have three dayanim who go down to make the evaluation. Echad Aimer b'mana, and one of the three dayanim says it's worth 100. Ushnayim Aimer b'masayim, and two of them say 200. Or Echad Aimer b'masayim, Ushnayim Aimer b'mana, or if two say 200 and one says 100. Batal Yachid b'miyutay. We have the general rule. We follow the Rav in a Bezdin. We have a vote, and the Bezdin, if they have a Rav, you follow the Rav. So that's simple. But this is where it gets complicated. Echad Aimer b'mana. One says it's 100 zuz. But Echad Aimer b'esrim sela. It's 20 sela. I think it's a sela, and a sela is made up of 4 zuz or shekel. I don't remember which one it is. So that's essentially 80 zuz. Let's call it zuz. So you have one. So again, so you have the first Bezdin. Reuven was the first member of the Bezdin. He said 100. The second one said 20 sela, which is 80. But and the third one, the third member of the Bezdin, says 30 sela, which is 120. So you have 80, 100, and 120. For some reason, not in that order. So Zaktamar Nidim b'mana. The Tanakama says we make it a mana. And it's the theory would be both the one who says it's worth 120 and the one who says it's worth 100. They both agree it's worth at least 100. So we have 2 out of the 3 that agree on 100. Even though the one says that you could get more, but he's masking that 100 is an amount you'll be able to get for it. Rabbi Eliezer Tzaddik disagrees. He says nidim b'tishim. He says the amount is 90, which is obviously hard to understand. It's going to need explanation. The Gemara is going to explain it because tishim wasn't even an option that anyone gave. We had 80, 100, and 120. Where does 90 come in? Then the last shita, which is even harder to understand, you take the total amounts of the 3 opinions where they differ, right? So the lowest amount was 80. And one says 40 more than that, and the other one says 20 more than that. So you take all of that and you divide it in thirds. Is that right? No.
You divide the 400 manas?
No, you don't draw divide. Yeah, you divide 400 manas, right?
No.
Let me see. It's 40 dinar is what separates them, right? The total amount that separates them between the 80 and the 120 is 40. It's not that you make an average. You take the full amount of what the highest amount is and what the lowest amount is. And then you take it and divide it in thirds. So a third of 40 is 13 and a third. So therefore, the amount would be 93 and a third. You add that. Now, I don't think that this cheshbon of the reason why I'm having a time, I don't think that's the reason. Because the Gemara is going to explain what the reason is, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do with that amount. It has to do with a totally separate cheshbon. I think this is just a way of identifying it. So, Dr. Gemara, Manda Amar Nidin B'mana, the one who says a mana, most of it's yasa, that we explained, that was pretty simple. You take the amount that two of them agree on. Davar Shava Achra Bein Shneim. So it's in between. Sorry. He says 90. Where does he get 90 from? It's really worth 90. Tisha Shava. It's really worth 90. Amar Esrim. And that what she said, 20, meaning 80 zuz, the Kataya Asar Lacharel. That the Bezdin, the member of the Bezdin, the Dayan, who said 80, he made a mistake. He underestimated by 10. The Amar Mana, and the one who said 100, Kataya Asar Lekame. He overestimated by 10. Means he said 100, but he really was mistaken, and it's really 90. Tomorrow, what do you mean? Adarabba, Hi Ara. Why are you picking and saying that we're going to just basically split the difference between the two lower amounts? One, you split the difference between the two higher amounts. Higher, and which what essentially we're doing is we're coming to a roiv. We're saying it's a roiv of the lower two amounts, and they each made a mistake of halfway in between. Expect tomorrow. Adarabba. Maybe it's worth 110. Either come Mana Katoya Sar Lecharab, either come Shloishim, one who said 120 Katoya Sar Lechamel. Let's say the upper two, the two higher estimations are the correct ones, and they were off on their estimations, and the real number is in between them. Sagt Gemara, Mekoit Mias Trei Kamoy Biyadecha. One says no, we prefer to take the lower two. The Mitaris Mana Le Mafkile. Because what that essentially means, we're on Zayin on the base, that we prefer to take the lower amount. This is what I said before about the Price is Right analogy. We prefer to take a lower amount. We say it's almost like a tafasta merubah tafasta. If we have to look at an estimation, we accept that the lower estimation is more likely going to be right. Meaning, I think that there's a tendency that you could. The thought is you could sell something for that price, so we prefer to take a price that you could sell it on rather than making an assumption that will lead us to a higher price where it possibly could be wrong to end up not getting sold at all. Now we finally get to the acherim, the mysterious acherim that said 92 and a third. Acherim, I remember, you make a you figure out how much the difference is between the highest and the lowest, and you divide it in thirds based on the three dayanim. Kasavri, where does he get this from? Kasavri, hi ara tishanu tlotsa v'tilsa shavi. That's really the correct price. That's what the market price is, and that's what it will sell at. Hi de ka'amar esim, and that which he said, the one who said esim, meaning 80, which is 13 and a third below 93 and a third. He made a mistake of underpricing it by 13 and a third. And the one who said 100, he made a mistake. He said it by 13. It was really 13 and a third higher, which actually 93 and a third plus 13 and a third comes out to 106 and 2/3. And he really should have said 106 and 2/3. That which he didn't say it, Sava mistoi the matfina kulehaya achavroye. He was sort of pushed. Again, all the Dayanim, I think, are aware of this tendency that we want to keep the price down in order that it should be able to be sold. So he had like cognitive dissonance. He was sort of bullied, this Dayan, into lowering his price. I'll make it 100. I'm saying more than this other Dayan who said 80, which is significantly less, instead of saying 106 and 2/3, which is what I really think the price is, because we're assuming they make the same mistake, the same scope of mistake, the same quantity of mistake. But he says he sort of he censors himself and he makes it a little bit lower so he won't be so far away from the other person. So now the Gemara asked the exact same question we asked before. This is all between the one who said 80 and the one who said 100. And it's hard enough to understand all of this. And as you'll see later, the Gemara also has a hard time understanding all this. Maybe the land is really worth 113 and a third. And the reason why, again, the one who said 130 lowered it is because he didn't want to exceed. Again, he lowered his price to be closer to the other person. The Gemara gives the same teretz that we'll take the lower two and try to understand how they could both be in concert, both saying the same amount really, and they're just making the same mistake. And then that way we'll end up with a lower amount and we'll be able to actually sell this property and be able to provide for the mezainis of the Isha and the Bas. Rav Huna says halacha kacher. Halacha is like this last shita, that it's 92 and a third, 93 and a third. Rav Ashi, Tamid acherim lo yadina, hilchos avdina kavasayu. Rav Ashi asked the question that we all feel. Do we really understand? Does this really make sense to us that we're saying one person said 80, one of the Dayanim said 80, one said 100, and one said 120, and somehow magically, by saying that they both made mistakes and then saying one of them made a smaller mistake because he lowered it to match the other one, and then it somehow magically comes out to 93 and a third, which is nothing, not anything in between anyone. It's now you're saying that that's what the halacha is like. It's hard to even understand what they mean. Which they say the same thing as the Acherim. And Rav Huna said halacha is like how the Dayani Goyla, Rav Ashi, Tab Dayani Goyla Yadin and Hilchos Avdin and Gavasayu. The same question, how could you paskin? So it comes out a machlokes between Rav Ashi and Rav Huna, who we paskin like. But the problem is Rav Ashi doesn't say who to paskin like. I don't see, if you look on Amen Aleph, You don't have to look, but it says the Rambam brings Nidim B'mana, the original. The Tanakh brings that lahalacha. The Rai says l'maskana, l'chayru we paskin like Ravashi. That says that this doesn't make sense to paskin like Al-Chayrim, and the first most reasonable pshat, most easily understandable pshat we paskin. Zok the Mishnah. Someone who says to his friend, "I'm selling you." I have to rush. Someone says to his friend, "I'm selling you a chatzi sada." Mashminin beineyen v'noitel chatzi sadeh. Mashminin beineyen is a very hard word to understand, and it doesn't. The Gemara is going to explain what it means, what it's saying. The way I understand it, mashmanim beineyen is that you make a shuma between them. You see who the value of the different parts of this person's property, this sada, and you divide it up. Noitel Chatzi today, who gets a half of, and as the Gemara is going to say, half of the value. He's going to get, the seller is going to say which part he wants him to get, and he takes that half. But Mashmini B'nei means that we take half of it. It has to be half of the value. If he said Chachi B'Doram Ani Meichel, he says, I'm selling you half of the sada in the south. Mashmini B'nei and B'noitel Chachi B'Doram. They make Mashmini B'nei and they give the value in between them, and he takes half of it in the south. So in addition to these rules about what the half the buyer gets, the buyer also gets something else. He gets, in addition to the field, the seller also has to provide him the place for the fence on the outside of the property, right around the property. And charetz and ben charetz. In addition, he has to give him like 2 ditches. He has to give him a charetz and the son of a ditch, which is a strange language to use. And the small ditch. B'kamahu charetz. How much is a charetz? Shisha tvachim. Ben charetz, and the small ditch is shloish. The Gemara is going to explain what these charetzim are about. Amar Rabbi Barabba Rabbi Yochanan. Lekech neitel kacha shebay. Rabbi Barabba says, this beginning of the Mishnah, we said, someone selling this, he said, I'm selling half of my field to you, that the buyer gets the half, the worst half, the inferior half, at the option of the seller. Now, the Mishnah says that you divide up the good and the good and the bad properties, so they come out to be equal. So he said, Amalei ad achala kafnaisa bebavel. You wouldn't have been so busy eating the dates in Bavel. Targmina miseifa. You would have used the seifa to understand what this means. Itani seifa. Chachi b'dar mani meichelach. It says he said, I'm selling you half of the southern half of the field. And then we say mashmina b'nein. What are we saying mashmina b'nein? That you make an umdino. What kind of shuma is there to do? He identified exactly what he's selling. So what does mashmina b'nei? And then you say again, he takes the chachi b'darim. So elamai, when it says mashmina b'nei, it doesn't mean that they get each half of the field, half of the good and half of the bad. Because in that context, it wouldn't make any sense in the Seifa. We said, I'm selling you the southern half of the field. You would always get the southern half. It doesn't make a difference whether you don't have to divide up the good parts and the bad parts and get the purchaser to get an equal share of each. So Elamai Mashmina B'nein means you have to make a shuma to figure out how much everything is worth in order that when he says, I'm selling you half of the field, it should be that he's getting half of the value of the field. When he says, I'm selling you the southern half, it doesn't mean he's giving him 50% in yardage, in square footage. It means he's giving him the southern half of value. Half is the half of the value. So there could be the southern half is only a quarter if it's very valuable. It could be 3/4 if it's not so valuable. So the first part, which said mashmidin, it also means that you make a shuma to determine how much everything is worth in order to make sure that the seller gets half of the value. But Eina Chanami, the purchaser gets half of the buyer gets half of the value. But Eina Chanami, the seller retains the right to take whichever half he wants, which could be The kachashaba, which the Gemara always assumes everyone wants idis, they don't want ziburas, so he's going to ostensibly keep for himself the idis and give a large volume of ziburas or kachush to the buyer. So he accepts upon himself the place for the fence. Tana charetz mibechutz, uban charetz mibefnim. We learned in the Mishnah that the large ditch that the seller has to give the buyer is on the outside, and the small ditch is on the inside. But both of them are the other side of the border. They're both within the seller's property. In order that an animal won't be able to jump in and destroy this tvua in the buyer's property. Why do you need two ditches? Why don't you just make the large ditch? So because since it's so large, since it's 6 tvachim wide, so a fox could jump into this ditch. Excuse me. He could jump into the spritz, then he could walk over to the other side and jump out. So the Gemara, beloved ben chritz, but the smaller one, the animal can't fit into it, and it's too big for him to jump over. So it's like the beloved ben chritz, I did the cut and kaima say the kafza. No, he says since the small one is too small, the animal could jump over it. The large one is too big that the animal could jump into it, but by having both, the animal gets stuck. If it goes into the bigger one, it won't be able to jump out of it and jump over the other one. Can't do both at the same time. And it won't be able to jump straight over the big one because it's too big. And the distance between the small one and the large one, you have to leave a tefach in between them. That's small enough that an animal can't climb up out of the large one and take a new jump over from it. It's too small for an animal to jump. Hadran Allah base court.
This goes all the way around. I don't understand what.
Yeah. Or I guess. Yeah, they don't want to have animals coming in, so they have a fence. Plus, they have ditches, and to the extent that the person selling has property next to where he's selling, this guy's not going to be able to. It's a little strange. Why is it his responsibility? But when someone sells property, selling it that it could be in a usable manner, and in order to make it usable, it needs to have a ditch around it.
So every time you have property that where they have these ditches around with the fence.
I guess so.
How farming style these days, I guess.
No, right. We have pesticides. We have better fences also.
I was growing up in Russia. I've never seen the ditches of fence.
Maybe I guess it depends where the different places have different animals. That depends what you grow, right? I know that like vegetable gardens, people have to be very, very cognizant. The animals will come in and eat it up.
Right.
The deer will come in. I don't know. So I guess there's all sorts of different predators or animals that will come in. Rabbits will destroy a vegetable garden. Yeah. Now we're getting into the sugya of Yerusha. And the most important thing to come out of all this is just to know the basic rules of Yerusha. So I'll tell you in advance what the basic rules of Yerusha are. The basic rule is that if someone passes away, his son yarshins him. That's number one. If he doesn't have a son, now, if he doesn't have a son, then it goes to the son's descendants. Whenever you have a Yerush, that Yerush includes all of their descendants. So if, let's say, Reuven had a son, Moshe, and Moshe died, but he left behind a son, Yankel. So Yankel could Yarshin Reuven. The son steps in the place of his father. That will be true of any Yerush. Let's say there was no son at all. So then instead of the son yarshining the father's father yarshins him. Oh, I'm sorry, first a daughter then yarshins. And if there's no daughter, and we'll have to talk about the descendants of a daughter. I don't think it works quite the same. But the descendants of, but if there's no daughter, then it goes to the father. And if there's no father, it goes to the brothers of the deceased, and so on. And then if there's no brothers, it goes to the brothers' descendants, and then it goes back up. There's always going to be a father, and if it's not his father's father. Everything goes through the paternal side. It's always through men, except obviously that a daughter can yarshin her father, and as we'll see, a husband can yarshin his wife. Let's see the mission. Yesh noichlin umanchilin. There are those who both yarshin, they inherit, umanchilin, and they provide an inheritance for others. Yesh noichlin are those who receive an inheritance, but they don't provide an inheritance to others. There's certain relationships. Manchilin v'loy noichlin. There are those who provide an inheritance to certain relationships. They'll provide inheritance, but they won't inherit them. The others who there's no relationship at all, and we'll see why we're mentioning them at all. So the Mishnah says, these are those who both inherit and they also provide inheritance to the other. A father to his sons, first of all, a father can, like we said, inherit his son. If the son didn't have children of his own, he could get an inheritance from his son, as well as he can also provide. That's the classic inheritance is from a father to a son. They're also the other way around. A son will both provide and will get an inheritance from his father and provide inheritance to his father. In addition, a brother, as long as it's a brother from the father, paternal brothers, they both will receive an inheritance and they will give an inheritance. Ish as imai, a man to his mother and a man to his wife, ubnei achayos, and the sons of sisters, meaning if someone has a sister, a man has a sister, and that sister has a son, noichlin, all of these will get an inheritance, but they will not provide an inheritance, right? A man will inherit his mother, but his mother does not inherit him. If a man dies, his mother does not get the inheritance. The same thing with a man and his wife. A man gets his wife. He is the first. He gets from his wife before anyone else. But a wife doesn't get the inheritance of a husband. The husband's inheritance goes to the sons, even though this is not practically usually the way things work in real life. People will write things over so that a wife these days, so usually a wife will inherit their husband before the children. But that's practically what people do, and it's very complicated how to effectuate that.
Even in those days, they did that.
Did they?
More the wife would inherit.
I don't know the times of Gemara, but I know it's been talked about the proper way to do it for many, many hundreds of years. I think so. The Gemara doesn't really talk so much about getting around these rules. So bnei achayis, and that means also the daughter of a sister. If a brother dies and he has a sister, the son of a sister, so the din is going to be noichlin. They're going to inherit but they won't provide inheritance to him. Isha es bonel. I'm going to just go quickly through the rest of the Mishnah. Isha es bonel, Isha es baila, va'achia aim. The other way around, a wife to a mother to her children, her sons, Isha es baila, and a wife to her husband, va'achia aim, and the brother of the mother of boys, manchilin, they will provide an inheritance to them. They will not inherit. The brothers from the mother, meaning maternal brothers, there's no inheritance at all. One might think since they're brothers, they should be able to inherit. No, there's no inheritance in that case. It will stop over here. And Be'ez Hashem, I really hope on Matzah Tisha